For this assignment we had to implement a prototype Android application that could be used as an ordering process. In this recording I will show you how mine works. For P4 we had to implement the application to meet the scenario above. I'll just show you how this works. If I select 1GB 17 i7 processor with no operating system and a MSI GTX 750, and if I click calculate, it should calculate to £335, which is shown here. For P6 I had to create a new activity, which is essentially creating a new page. I've done this by adding a button called instructions, and if I click that, it will take me to the page. In here I've got the program version, the developer, which is myself, the date of creation, and the description. And then I can click home again, and it will bring me back to the home page. The task for P2 was to demonstrate how I've used event-driven techniques. The first one is buttons, and how I've used this is in a calculate button here, which if I show you my code, I've used an if code. So, sorry, I meant if statement. So when the button is clicked, this part of code here will be run. I've used text boxes for my promotional code, and so the user can enter a code to make a discount. If I change the things back to where we were at the start, so if I change it to an i7 processor and MSI GTX 750 and type in trade 001, it should come back less than 335. So just see if that works. And yes, the answer is £301.50. I have used labels on my instructions page, and this basically just gives information to the user, and they're very quick labels. I have used on-click event-driven techniques to use my buttons. I've used one on my calculate button. If I just show you, if I click the calculate and scroll down to the on-click, here I've created an on-click for calculate total, which will then link to here, which will then run the button. I have used variables in my application in the string array, which if I just scroll up is here. I've used the variable here to populate my spinners. Scrolling down on the code, I will get to my if statements. I've used these here as a conditional method for executing different scenarios depending on the data which is being handled. For debugging, I've used the debugging tool in the console, so this is when the compiler checks for the errors, which is shown here. Moving on to M2, for this section I have to justify and give reasons for the tools that I've used in my application. So I've used the if statement here so that I can execute different pieces of code depending on the data given, which should then, because I've got the calculate total on click value, it will run the calculate button. For the variables, I've used variables, which an example is here in my code, so that I can store values for when calculating the final price. The graphical user interface, I've can show this by opening my device, and if I go to the instructions page, when it loads, I can show this by creating a reasonable size so that any user or most users would be able to read it, and a standard text, not any funky styles. I've used buttons so that it's easy for the users to locate and get around the application, and the calculate button here is reasonably big with capital letters so that it's easily found on the page. If I go back to my code, I have comments here and here which explain my code, which helps me to keep track and know what the particular piece of code underneath does. Layout and indentation is a big part of code. I can show you this here and here and here, and it's mainly the use of white space on the page. This is mainly just so it's easier for the programmer to read and find things, really. Triggers are my on-click functions, and I can show you these here again on the on-click button, calculate, and I can also show you this one which moves page, and I've used these to execute code when something happens. So when this instructions button is clicked, it will move page to the instructions page, and when the calculate button is clicked, it will calculate the total of the items here that the user has selected. And there we go. I hope that this fits the requirements for the assignment. Thank you.